Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 673 for the 11th of Tishrei in a regular year. For years, I have tried to plant a garden on my fire escape. Most of this time, unfortunately, has been unsuccessful. However, the few times that I have succeeded in planting something, namely, I remember there was one year where I was able to plant some jalapeno peppers. Another time I was able to plant basil. Another time I was able to plant tomatoes. It was really such an amazing feeling. It was so cool. It was like, here I am, I'm putting this stuff into the ground and I'm making food for myself. I'm producing food out of the earth. So unfortunately, I don't know if it's because of the placement of my fire escape. Maybe I don't get enough sun. Maybe the weather's not quite right. Or more likely, I probably just don't really know what I'm doing. Unfortunately, most of my attempts at gardening on my fire escape have not been very good. However, maybe some of you listeners are a little bit more adept at gardening. Maybe you've been involved with gardening, and gardening is a whole skill. It's something that people really love. They find it really meditative, and they find it really wondrous at the same time. I know my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, who this podcast is actually dedicated to, he loved gardening. He had a whole garden in his backyard where he would grow all kinds of different things that he would feed to his family. And he would really get amazed, just as one should be amazed, at the fact that, like, literally from the ground, from earth, from nothing, this food comes out. It's amazing. Fruits, vegetables, sometimes even things that aren't edible but are really pretty. All life actually comes out from the ground. So perhaps this can explain why throughout the world, throughout many cultures, there is an acknowledgement of a certain reverence for the earth, for the power of the earth, the ground below us, to the point that the phrase Mother Earth is very common. Even in regular vernacular amongst people, there's this acknowledgement that the earth has this very strong power to it. In the Bible, we see that there's a poetic kind of reference to the earth, of this idea of, for you are dust and to dust you shall return. You know, that life, that that man actually came from the earth. There's a certain acknowledgement that all life really comes from the earth and is dependent on the earth to such a great extent. When people talk about climate change and everything, it's all about preserving our earth, right? And within Judaism, we see that this concept of the earth actually, especially in Kabbalistic literature, comes up in a few ways. There's the idea of the elements, that there's four basic elements in creation. And those four basic elements are earth, water, fire, and air. And earth is thought to be the lowest and the heaviest of all the elements. But at the same time, if you recall several episodes ago, we talked about this idea of how Avraham Avinu likened himself to the earth. And while at first this sounded as if he was being self-deprecating, we actually went into a deeper explanation of that. And when he called himself, he said, I am dust, I am ashes, I'm nothing but the earth element. He actually was saying that there was something about him, about his the way that he manifested the element of chesed, that was like very essential. Like the element of chesed within him was found in a very, very essential way, that if you take a tree and you burn it to the ground, what you have left is ashes. And ashes are the earth element of the tree. So we talked about how every created being has these four elements contained within it. And the ashes are the earth element. And what this shows is that when a tree is burned, the only element that remains is the earth element, because the earth element is actually, in a certain sense, the strongest, and it's kind of like the essence of what this tree is. So there's something very essential about the earth element, something very, very powerful about it. Everything kind of reverts back. It's the heaviest of all the elements. We also know that the earth element comes up in a different way when we talk about the orders of creation, that there's 4 basic orders of created beings. We have the inanimate life, which is rocks and crystals and dirt and stuff like that, which is pretty much synonymous with the earth element. Then we have the vegetative world. We have the world of the trees and the plants and all that stuff. And that actually parallels with the water element, if you're curious about that. That's the growth. It's the power of growth. Then we have the level of the animals, and the animals, not only do they grow, but they also move. And so there's this like dynamism about them. And that's why the animals correspond to the fire element. And then the highest of all creation is man. And man is what is man? Man is that not only do we grow, not only do we move, but we also speak. That's why in Hebrew, the man, in Kabbalistic literature, man is called the medaber, the speaking one. And man corresponds to the air element. It's the lightest of all the elements. That's like speaking is kind of like, when people say that somebody is an airhead, so to speak, it's like it means that they talk a lot. Like they're kind of like just very like flippant in their words, but that's sort of like the extreme version of the power of man, is to be this airy creature, this creature that rises above everything else. So at first glance, it seems like, and in a certain sense, it is true that man is the pinnacle of creation. Then there's a hierarchy, then there's the animal, then there's the vegetative, and then the inanimate, the rocks, the earth elements is the lowest. There's actually a reversal of this in the sense that, as again, something that we spoke about already, is this idea that the higher something is in its source, the lower it falls, meaning that there's something about the inanimate world, the world of the earth element, that actually comes from a higher place. And today that's exactly what we're going to be talking about. And we're really going to delve into this earth element and show how the earth element is in fact so powerful and in fact so essential and so high that it is the one thing that we have in this world that can give us a sense of creation ex nihilo, the unique power of the vegetative, the unique power of the earth, of things growing from the earth, is that the ex nihilo aspect of it, the aspect of creation ex nihilo that's found within it, is not just something that happened once upon a time in the 6 days of creation, like most other things in creation, such as the creation of fish in the sea, the creation of animals, things like that, but rather it's something that's perpetual and that continues to happen all the time. And by virtue of it being perpetual in this way, there's actually an infinite quality about it. It gives us a sense of the infinite God. So just a very simple understanding of this is when you look at various like fish in the sea, animals on the lands, things like that. Sure, there are constantly new fish being born. The fish reproduce like everything else. Animals reproduce as well. However, there's a limit to this. It's like, there can only be new fish in comparison to the other fish that were born. And there's not like new species of fish that are born. We're working with the same fish pool, right? The same gene pool. With plants and the vegetative life, it's a little bit different because, first of all, like in order for fish to be born or animals to be born, there needs to be some kind of reproductive process that happens. Different animals, different fish have different things. I'm far from an expert in these things, but each one, there's a science to it. Just like how humans reproduce, one being comes about from the other, and there's a very strong semblance between one and the other. So it's like, let's say if you have like puppies, right? If you have little puppies, the puppies look very similar to the dog that it's coming from, right? So, but when we look at plant life, it's very, very different than that. First of all, there are plants that come about without any kind of reproduction in that kind of sense at all, where it's like there's not even a need for anybody to plant a seed, and they're just different kinds of weeds and different kinds of grass and things like that that come spontaneously out of the ground. They literally just spontaneously emerge out of the ground. And even in the case of us planting those seeds, when we plant those seeds, the emerging result of that really bears no comparison to the seed itself, right? It's like when you look at an apple tree and then you look at the seed of an apple tree, it's like, what's the connection, right? It's like very, very different. So there's obviously something very different and much more profound and much more indicative of this ex nihilo type of creation that's found in the earth. And the broader context of our discussion of what we've been learning in this epistle, we're in this very lofty, very esoteric epistle, Epistle 20 in Iggeres HaKodesh, is the value of this physical world and the preciousness of this physical world in the scheme of creation, and the uniqueness of this physical world in the sense that it is really the only thing that was created ex nihilo, and that itself is quite amazing. And that when we look at all the other types of creation, all the other worlds, spiritual worlds, lofty worlds, things like that, as lofty as they may be and as holy as they may be, they don't have this connection to God in an essential way as the physical world does, because the physical world, by virtue of it being created ex nihilo, really manifests God in an essential way that nothing else does. And so today, coming back to today and the earth element, so we're going to learn about how the earth element really manifests this, really gives us a worldly illustration of this power of ex nihilo. And we're going to first explore this in a very basic sense, just kind of like looking at the earth element and looking at how things grow and how we can actually see if we really meditate upon it and we really think about it and we look at the growth of different plants and different herbs in the ground, how this ex nihilo really is manifest. And then we're going to talk about it from a more Kabbalistic perspective. And we're going to talk about how this is, like, why is it specifically the earth elements, the lowest element of all of creation, why it's specifically that element that manifests this power of ex nihilo, and what that's sourced in, where that originates in. So let's get into the text and see how the Alter Rebbe explains this. And we can kind of discuss a little bit more as we go. So again, for context, we are in the middle of Epistle 20 of Iggeres HaKodesh. And the Alter Rebbe starts off this section today with a reference to this ha'ara da ha'ara da ha'ara, the radiance of the radiance of the radiance of the Kav. So what is that a reference to? So for full context about this, really, I strongly encourage you to go back and listen to previous episodes, the past few episodes where we really got into these terms, into the whole map of this creation ex nihilo and what that's all about. But in brief, just to kind of bring us to here where we are now, is so there's the Kav. What is the Kav? The Kav is translated to mean a line, but it really is like a measuring stick. This Kav is where creation really, really starts off. This is the measuring stick within God. So it's like no creation has happened yet. It's still within God himself, but where he's measuring out how he wants this creation to be. So it's sort of like if you have like an architect who did not yet put anything on paper, did not yet tell anybody about his idea, did not yet buy the tools and materials for his building or anything like that. He's just sitting there and he's contemplating this creation that he wants to make, this building, let's say, that he wants to make, and he is like measuring it out in his mind. He's thinking about the various limitations, the various constraints. What are the constraints that are involved with this creation? That is the Kav. That Kav contains within it all of creation in a very, very, very constricted way. It's sort of like if you, like, do you ever see one of those, like, let's say chairs or something like that, or big balls or something like that, that you're able to like squish up into the point that it can like fit inside your purse? You know, it's like that and even more. It's like sort of like this very, very dense containment of the entirety of creation into this one single line, which is known as the Kav. So that Kav itself is, we don't experience that Kav directly. What we experience in that Kav, in our reality, is what's known as a ha'ara da ha'ara da ha'ara, a radiance of a radiance of a radiance, which is something we spoke about previously. We spoke about this yesterday. And just in brief, the illustration, which I actually got from listening to a shir on this from Rabbi Paltiel, just to give a little bit of recognition. And just as a side note, a shout out to Rabbi Paltiel. Recently, I've become acquainted with his shiurim of Tanya, and I find that they have been really, really helpful to me in terms of especially these more difficult sections of Tanya that I'm really trying to grapple and try to understand. I find of the different things that are out there, personally, I have found that he tends to, at least in English, maybe there are other things in Yiddish. I've heard that Yoel Khan in Yiddish, his classes are really good too. My Yiddish is not good enough for that, but at least in terms of English shirim, I find Rabbi Paltiel's shirim to be the most down to earth and detail oriented. Really, like they like he really. I get the sense that he really understands what he's saying, at least to the point that we can understand these concepts, you know? So anyway, so I highly encourage you guys to, if you want like another Tanya shir to kind of like, I don't want to take away from my podcast, obviously, but if you want something else to kind of like add on to this, I highly encourage Rabbi Paltiel Shirim. And so with that being said, so this imagery that I of the ha'ara dahara, of the radiance of the radiance of the radiance, I actually got from Rabbi Paltiel. The way that he explains it is he says that what is the radiance? The radiance is like the ray of sunlight, let's say. The radiance of the radiance is that ray of sunlight, let's say, hitting a prism, and then from that prism there's a rainbow. And then the radiance of the radiance of the radiance is the person who perceives that rainbow. So then what you're seeing with your eyes is like your particular experience of that rainbow. So it's like 3 steps removed from the original source. So you have the sun, and then the sun has a radiance. That radiance hits a prism that causes a rainbow kind of to happen. And then you have a person or someone who's perceiving that, and that's the radiance of the radiance of the radiance. So anyways, going back to our discussion. So this is really what the kav, the kav that is the source of all of creation. And when we say the source of all of creation, we mean specifically the source of all of creation ex nihilo, which was what makes it so powerful. That's where there's that leap from, you know, just having things being created something from something in this causality way, or being created ex nihilo. That is all found in the power of the kav. When we go back to, okay, where is it found? It's found in the vessels. It's found in the malchus of Atzilus, all that stuff. But really, if we go back to the origin of it all, it's coming from that kav. And specifically in terms of our experience of it, is the ha'ara of the kav, the radiance of the radiance of the radiance of the kav. So now today we're going to talk about how it is, like the Alter Rebbe goes on, and he says that this power of the radiance of the radiance of the kav, it actually illustrates its power and its ability, perhaps surprisingly, in the element of earth, of physical earth, with intense revelation. And it does so with greater intensity than the higher elements, the elements that are higher than the element of the earth, right? Because again, the earth element is the lowest of all the elements. But yet, interestingly, this lowest of all elements actually is the element that manifests and illustrates the power of creation ex nihilo. Even higher, it does this way, even in a higher way, it illustrates this power, the earth element, even in a higher way than the heavenly hosts. Because the heavenly hosts, as high as they are, as lofty as they are, they do not have the ability to bring something into being, something from nothing, perpetually. So this takes us to that broader story of creation. When we look at the creation of the world in the Bible, there was this idea of the world being created in 7 days or 6 days, and then the 7th day was Shabbos when Hashem rested, and that the world was created. It was a one-time event that Hashem created the world, right? And the way that he did this was by use of the heavenly host. So there was this creation of ex nihilo that did happen with the assistance of the heavenly host once upon a time. However, then there's another aspect of creation, which is not that one-time event that happened, but actually it's something that's perpetual and something that's happening all the time. We spoke about this at length in Shari Chudva Emunah, this idea that creation is happening, is the world is being created, brought into being, something from nothing all the time. And that power of the world being created something from nothing all the time, perpetually, in this perpetual manner, is not something that the heavenly hosts have the power to do, but rather we actually do see an illustration of this specifically in the earth element, because we see that in the earth element, what is the earth element doing? The earth element is constantly bringing into being different plants and trees. Like, this is a perpetual thing. There are always new plants and trees that are coming out of the earth. And we're actually going to learn tomorrow that there's, some of it is with the assistance of people planting, but some things actually come of the earth spontaneously on their own. But regardless, and this is a little bit more of tomorrow's episode, is regardless, there's there's a disintegration that happens. So it's like it looks like it's like, okay, the seed, we'll put the seed in the ground, there's a seed that comes in the ground, and then that's where the plant or the tree comes from. That's actually not the case at all. The seed actually disintegrates into the earth, and then the plant or the seed actually comes out from nothingness, from the ground itself, from the power of the ground itself. So that the plant or the tree is actually something totally separate from the seed from which it's coming from. And so now in brackets, the Alter Rebbe brings a seeming challenge to this idea. He says, like, isn't it taught, there's this teaching of this idea that every tree, every plant, every flower has a mazel associated with it, has this like kind of astrological force associated with it that tells it to grow. So there's this idea that every single tree and every single plant life, every single herb, flower, whatever it is, has a mazel hovering over it, has this like force, this life force hovering over it, and it's telling it to grow, like grow. And the more it tells it to grow, then it grows. So that seemingly is a contradiction to what we've been saying, because if that's the case, then we know that it's not actually growing from the earth elements, but it's growing because of these mazalas, right? And so the Alter Rebbe says this mazel is only telling it to grow after it's already there, after it already exists, after the plant has already sprouted. But it's not telling it to grow something from nothing, but rather it's just telling it to grow from being small to being bigger, to bear fruits of its particular species or like that kind of thing, right? But before it sprouts at all, there would be no sprout. There is no sprout for which the mazel to tell it to grow. So it's like the mazel is only there telling the plant to grow if it already exists, if there's already a sprout there. But if there's no sprout, then it cannot tell it to grow. There's nothing to say grow to because it doesn't exist. So the actual initial growth of this plant life, of this thing, comes from the koach hatzomach, comes from the vegetative power that's found within the earth, which is actually nothingness, and it's spiritual. It's a spiritual power. And then we see that the actual thing that grows out of it is physical, right? So that's what's like really amazing. That's the miracle that happens in plant life, in the vegetative world. Like, we take it for granted that it's like you plant a seed in the ground and it's going to grow. Like, yeah, science can explain that, quote unquote, type of thing. But really, it's actually a miracle. Like, how is it that this big tree or this plant or whatever it is comes out from the ground when it's like the seed actually that it came from actually disintegrates into the ground? So it's actually coming from nothing. It's actually coming out of nowhere. And that is due to the power of growth that's found in the earth, which is this manifestation. It's an illustration to us of this power of yesh mi'ayin, of this power of ex nihilo. Okay, so now that's kind of section 1 of this section today. Now, where there's this illustration of what's happening, now the Alter Rebbe is going to give a little bit of a Kabbalistic explanation of that as to why it is. Why is it that this earth has this special power to it that no other elements in creation have? So he gives a few reasons for this, and each one is pretty lofty. So if you don't fully grasp each one, that's okay. So I'm going to kind of go through it to the best of my ability and just take it for what you can. Some of it is a reference to some of the things that we learned about previously. And again, the biggest takeaway for me that I think should be taken from this is just to pique your curiosity to want to learn about these terms more, and to also get the general idea of just how lofty this power of creation ex nihilo is, and how amazing it is that, as lofty as it is, it's the loftiest power in the scheme of creation, and yet at the same time it's the most accessible to us, and it's the most manifest to us specifically here in this physical world. That's the takeaway from here. So the Alter Rebbe says that the reason why is it that this earth element has this special power to it, uniquely has the special power, is because the feet of Ak end at the end of Asiya. So just to explain that again. So if you remember from a few episodes ago, we've been talking about this idea of Ak. What is Ak? Adam Kadmon. Adam Kadmon is primordial man. Primordial man is the level of creation that is above the worlds. So it's above even the world of Atzilus. And because even though Atzilus is the world of emanation, where there's no actual like substantial creatures that have real difference and substance to them, because everything is nullified in its source, Adam Kadmon is even above that, because the world of Atzilus is there's still a potential there for things to happen in this very real way. So again, when we talked about, remember the conception of a child, the world of Atzilus is where you have like the mother and father, and they exist and they contain within them the power to have a baby, but they haven't yet conceived the baby. There is no child. However, there's still an idea of a child. There's still a very, very real potential of a child. Everybody knows that it's like if that man and woman get together, there's a very real possibility that they will give birth to a child. It's very, the sense of otherness is very real, even if it's not actually manifest right then and there. In the world of Adam Kadmon, there is no other. There is no, it's like beyond space, beyond time. It's everything's there, but in such high potential state. It's like it's purely the world of real potential. On the other hand, as lofty as this world of Adam Kadmon is, and world in a quote unquote way, I say, because once we say the word world, there's an acknowledgement of something that has dimensions to it. So it's like Adam Kadmon is a world, but it's like pre-world. It's a primordial world. So even though it's pre-world, even though it's like this place of such pure potential and beyond space, beyond time, all that stuff, it does actually contain within it everything. And it's like, we know that like that's this idea of the feet of Adam Kadmon, the feet of Adam Kadmon, like we spoke about previously, that's like where it all starts. This is like the origin of everything is in the feet of Adam Kadmon, the end there. And we know that the feet of Adam Kadmon contain within them everything, all of creation, from the beginning, from the end, everything at all. And so since they contain everything within them, where do they actually end? They end at the very end of Asiya, the very end of our world. Right? So now we see, this is answer number one to why it is that this power of the earth actually is so powerful, why the earth element is so powerful, because the Adam Kadmon, which is the source of all of creation, the source of creation ex nihilo, the feet of Adam Kadmon actually ends, the end of them is in the end of Asiya. So it's kind of like they're rooted in the end of Asiya. So that's answer number one. The second answer is that, as explained in the text, that underneath these feet, this feet of Adam Kadmon, shines the light of the Or Ein Sof, that is Sovev Kol Amin, without much of an interruption between them, except for the Igulim of Adam Kadmon. So, okay, that's a very dense statement there. So I'm going to try to explain this to the best of my ability, is that basically there's this idea of two different types of light that we brought up before. There's the general light that Hashem uses to create the worlds, to manifest the worlds. There's the light of Mamala Kol Amin, and then there's the light of Sovev Kol Amin. The light of Mamala Kol Amin can be thought of as the immanent light. It's the light that is within all of creation in a very individualistic and very permeating kind of way. And then there's the light of Sovev Kol Amin, which transcends all the worlds, which encompasses all the worlds. But for the purpose of our discussion today, we're going to talk about the fact that Sovev Kol Amin, also in Hebrew, it means surrounds. There's a circular element to it. And so what that means when we say that there's a circular element to the light that's of Sovev Kol Amin, we can see this by virtue of looking at the earth, that the earth is a circle, right? And the way that a circle works is, remember that game when you were little kids and you used to dig into the ground and you said that, if you dig far enough, you're going to get to China and you'll get to the other side. So, well, it's a silly little kids exercise. The truth of the matter is that theoretically speaking, yeah, if you go down deep enough into the earth, like you get to the other side and you're actually just as close to the heavens as you were on the other side, right? So it's like if you look up the sky now and if you were to go like, in an airplane or a spaceship or something like that and try to reach to the sun, if the same person was doing that on the other side of the earth, they'd also be reaching up to the sun in the same way. So there's like this circular aspect. So it's like when you have a circle like that, what happens in a circle is that the highest point and the lowest point are actually connected. So it's like, imagine like, let's say the sun, let's say you're picturing like you're at the sun, and then it's like you go down from the sun all the way down to earth. So you got down pretty low. But then if you keep going down lower and lower and lower and lower until you get to like the other side of the earth and you keep going in the same direction, you're actually going to get to the sun again. So the lowest is actually connected to the highest. And that is the point that the Alter Rebbe is trying to bring out here today with this idea of how underneath these feet of Ak, underneath the feet of Adam Kadmon, is this circular energy, this energy of this light of Sovev Kol Amin. So it's a circular light, which actually makes it so that there's not a lot of difference. There's not a big distance between the circle and the feet of Ak. The only thing that separates between them, it says, is the Igule Adam Kadmon, the circles of the Adam Kadmon. So these things, I'm explaining them in a very kind of simplistic way. I honestly don't understand them fully. These are very, very deep Kabbalistic concepts, but that's sort of the basic idea. Okay, so that's answer number 2 as to why it is that the earth element has this special power of ex nihilo. So to recap, reason number 1 is because the feet of Ak, which is the origin of this creation ex nihilo, the origin of all of creation, they're planted in, like they end in this world of Asiya, this lowest world of Asiya. And then reason number 2 is because there's right underneath the feet of Ak is this element of Sovav Kalamin, this circular light within which the bottommost point is actually the highest most point because it's a circle in that way. Okay, now reason number 3 is then we're talking about the Kav. So we said, when we talked about the Kav, we said that the Kav ends at the end of the feet of Adam Kadmon. Then this Kav shines up in a way of, or choser, it's called, in a way of a rebounding light. So so that's, again, a very esoteric kind of concept, but a way to kind of understand that is, again, if you look at the earth, the physical earth, so the hottest point of the earth is actually right in the middle of the earth, right? So that's why it's like those exercises of trying to dig into the earth until you reach China. You can never do that because at a certain point, it gets so hot, it's not sustainable. And that's very interesting, right? It's like, why is the center of the earth so hot? So Kabbalistically speaking, it's because of this or choser, because there's a connection between the sun and the bottom, that it's like there's this, like it's like if you have this contained space, it's like if you bounce a ball down from the top, it's going to rebound back up again. Or if you radiate heat from the top, the heat is going to rise back up again. So there's this rebounding energy that happens. So this is, again, the same idea of like, basically it's like we have the Kav, right? Which is, again, the Kav is the origin of all of creation. That is the origin of everything. This is the measuring stick through which God created all of creation. And the Kav ends at the feet of Adam Kadmon. After the Kav of Adam Kadmon, all we have is the radiance of the Kav, or the radiance of the radiance of the Kav, and all that other stuff we spoke about earlier. However, nevertheless, since the Kav ends at the feet of Adam Kadmon, wherever it ends, there's this principle of a rebound principle. So there's a rebound of the energy going back up again. And so again, since the feet of Adam Kadmon, where did the feet of Adam Kadmon end? The feet of Adam Kadmon end in our physical world, in our physical reality, which means that there's this rebound energy that goes all the way back up to the Kav. Right? So that's the power of physical reality. So again, to explain the 3 reasons why it is that the earth element specifically has this power of ex nihilo within it. Reason number 1 is because the lowest part of the world of Asiya, which is our world, this earth that we live in, is the very bottom of the feet of Ak. So, and the feet of Ak is, again, the source of all of creation. This is the part within God that God, like, this is where creation happens. This is where it all starts, is in the feet of Ak. Reason number 2 is because right underneath the feet of Ak, that's where you have the light of Sovav Kol Amin, which is this circular light in which a circle, the bottom and the top are interconnected. So that's the very lowest point is actually also the very highest point. And then reason number 3 is because of the Kav. And while the Kav itself ends at the feet of Ak, and doesn't essentially go past that place, nevertheless, there's a rebound energy that goes from the lowest point to the highest point. And since we already said that the feet of Ak ends in our lowest world of Asiya, in this earth that we live in, that rebound energy goes all the way back up to the Kav, which the Kav is the true origin of Ex Nihilo. It's the true measuring stick through which God creates everything in the world, aka the origin of Ex Nihilo creation. And the Alter Rebbe says that this or choser, this rebounding light of the Kav, we see that this is a similar thing to when we see that the Kav actually becomes invested within the levels of Arich Anpin, of Abba Ve'ima, and Zer Anpin and Nukva, of Atzilos. So we don't need to get into the details of like what every single one of those mean, but the basic idea is like all these different levels within Atzilos. So this Kav does get vested within those levels of Atzilus, but it radiates there. It radiates in all these higher levels in Atzilus through the rebounding light that's found in Malchus of Atzilus. So it's really the Malchus of Atzilus, which is the lowest part of Atzilus, that actually causes this radiation of the Kav of the light of the Kav through this rebounding energy. So it's like sort of like the basic idea is that the radiance, it seems like the radiance is coming from above to below, but in a sense it's actually coming from below to above because of the rebounding energy, the rebounding nature of the light. And then we also talked about this Malchus of Atzilus, this lowest part of Atzilus is actually also the Keter from below to above, right? Like we talked about how the Malchus of one world becomes the Keter of the world below it, because the end is wedged in the beginning. And so similarly, this whole idea is that basically when the end of the Kav, that ends at the end of the Yosher of Adam Kadmon, at the end of like the detailed aspects of the feet of Adam Kadmon, then there's also this rebounding energy that comes from below to above to the aspect of the light of the Neshama of Malchus of Asiyah. So which is actual godliness, which comes from the external vessels of Malchus of Atzilus. So there's a lot there. Once again, it's just like really, I kind of like breezed through that last section. But again, it's that same basic idea of that radiating, rebounding light that comes from below to above, that connects with the Malchus of Asiyah, which we know is connected ultimately with the Malchus of Atzilus, specifically to the external Kalim, the external vessels of Malchus of Atzilus, which was really where all of Ex Nihilo happens. So I kind of breezed through that part. Yeah, and if I were to tell you guys that I really understood all of this, I would be lying. I'm trying the best of my ability to learn this stuff along with you guys, and as much as I am able to understand all of it, there's just like levels and levels way above me. And again, the main message is really to understand, to gain an appreciation of our physical reality. That's the message of this Iggeres, this epistle, is the preciousness of our physical world, which is ultimately going to translate into this preciousness of our doing mitzvahs here in this physical world, due to the power, this special power that our physical world has, and this essential connection that we have to God, to this power of ex nihilo creation. Now the Alter Rebbe brings a citation from Sefer Gilgulim, from the book on reincarnation that's written by the Arizal, as was already mentioned in Likutei Amarim in the Tanya, in the first part of Tanya, in chapter 20 of the Tanya. There's this teaching that this radiance of the Kav that we've been talking about, the Kav of the Ein Sof, which is, again, the source of all of creation, the source of all the limitations that make creation possible, the radiance of this Kav of the infinite light initially gets vested within the light of Atzilus, within Asiyah. So not to get too caught up in the weeds of Kabbalistic terminology today, but just in brief. So if you've been following along, you know that there's the four basic worlds of Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. And within each one of these worlds, we also have something called the 10 spheros, right? But where it gets to be a little bit more nuanced is that within each one of these worlds, you have a breakdown of those four worlds. And within each one of the spheros, you have a further breakdown of each one of the spheros. And it kind of continues like that ad infinitum, where it just continues more and more, like the more specific you get in terms of the definition of where you're looking at in the map. So like, for example, if we're talking about chesed, are we talking about pure chesed, like as it's found within the world of Atzilus? Or are we talking about chesed of Gevura within the world of Bria? And it's all these things, it's all relative, they're all kind of like relativistic terms in a certain sense. So right now, in the context of what we're learning in the Tanya, we're actually talking about the world of Asiyah, but within the world of Asiyah, you have the four worlds of Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. The way to understand this kind of like in a little bit more tangible way is that each one of these worlds corresponds to a different place in the map in terms of the spheres, so that the world of Atzilus can pretty much be understood to be parallel to the attribute of Chokhmah. The world of Bria can be parallel to the attribute of Bina. The world of Yetzirah can be parallel to the attribute of the 6 midos, and then the world of Asiyah can be parallel to the attribute of Malchus. So it's like when we're saying that it's the Atzilus of Asiyah, that's another way of saying the Chokhmah of Asiyah. So going back to our text with that little tangent. So basically, the radiance of the Kav, of the infinite light, gets vested within the light of Atzilus that is found in Asiyah, and then from there it gets vested in the light of Bria, and then after that the light of Yetzirah, all within the world of Asiyah. And from there it comes down into the aspect of the light of the neshama of Malchus of Asiya. So it's like the lowest of the lowest place in Asiya. So that's the main thing you need to know about, is that this light of the Kav, the radiance of the Kav, comes down all the way till the level of Malchus of Asiya, which is the lowest of all levels. And this progress of what happens to the light is what gives the power and force at the end of the vessel in Malchus of Asiya that's found in the element of the earth. So this is basically just all an explanation as to what it is that we learned yesterday, that there's this special power that's found within the earth element to create Yesh Ma'ayin, to have this like semblance of this creation of Yesh Ma'ayin, of Ex Nihilo creation, is because of this progression of the Kav that goes all the way through until it gets to the very end. And now the Alter Rebbe says that this is how we can understand when we look at in the story of creation in the very beginning in Bereshis, when it talks about how creation happened, the 6 days of creation. We know that when it describes the creation of the vegetative life, it says something very interesting. It says Tidashe haaretz v'chulei. So, and that's found in Bereshis chapter 1, verse 11. So the translation of that is that let the earth bring forth herbs and vegetative, plant life and all that stuff. And so this verbiage, this statements that was made where God said, let the earth bring forth herbs, this was meant to be something that would be perpetual. And then in brackets, this says this is an aspect of infinitude. This is an aspect of Ein Sof, which means that it didn't just happen in the 6 days of creation, like with the other statements. So, for example, some other statements that came up in the 6 days of creation was Yishchotzu hamayim. This is from Bereshis chapter 1, verse 10, where it says, let the waters bring forth an abundance of creeping creatures, as well as another statement that was made was Totzeh haaretz nefesh chaya, which is from Bereshis chapter 1, verse 24, let the earth bring forth living beings. So these are two things that describe, these were the two statements that describe the creation of the creatures that are in the water and the creatures and the animals that were on the land. So those things were created as a one-time event. These were things that Hashem created during the 6 days of creation, and that's it. And their source, if we want to know Kabbalistically, where did they come from? Their source was from the Chochmah of Malchus of Asiya. So meaning that their kind of origin was within this world of Asiya. It didn't come from the radiance of the Kav like the vegetative life did. And so what happened was that during the 7 days of creation in the beginning, then there shined into this light a radiance that was with chesed chinam, a gratuitous kindness. So without any elevation from below at all. So the basic idea is that in order for things to happen in the world, in order for God to draw down kindness into the world, he really prefers for it to begin with an arousal from below. He wants us to pray, right? In our everyday life, he wants us to do something to kind of show him hi, we're here, we're doing something. And that arouses him to respond in kind and to give to us. We spoke about this at length when we spoke about tzedakah in previous parts of the Tanya. However, in the very beginning of creation, there was no other. We didn't exist to give tzedakah, to daven to him, things like that. So in that case, God created the world in this way of chesed chinam, where he just gave to the world in a gratuitous way. And this gratuitous giving is those original statements that were made, these original sayings through which God created the world. However, what was different about the creation of plant life versus the creation of everything else is that everything else was created as a one-time event. When God created the reptiles in the sea, when God created the animals on the earth, he created them as a one-time thing. And then it's okay, yes, they can reproduce one from another. And it's a more natural kind of process. But when God created the plant life, he put something in the plant life that is something more miraculous than that, or more, overtly miraculous, in the sense that he gave the plant life the ability to not just sprout forth vegetables at that very time, but to do that continuously and perpetually, forever. And this is something that happens constantly, year by year, says the Alter Rebbe. And this is an aspect of infinitude. And when we say infinitude, we really mean infinitude. We mean to the point that, like, even if, like, for the world were to exist for myriads upon myriads of years, then then this would still happen. There'd still be this sprouting thing. So, different creatures can become extinct. Plant life doesn't get extinct in the same way, as far as I know. Okay, so now the Alter Rebbe goes on and he says that truly there are some types of vegetative life, some types of plants that need this like elevation from below, need this mein nukvin, the feminine waters, meaning to say that like we need to do something. We need to plant seeds in the ground. So meaning they don't just come about or arise spontaneously. There is a human effort there. We need to actually plant those seeds in the ground. So a person might say, so we're doing something. So it's not ex nihilo. There's an active participant of a human. So we're actually, it's the human that's doing something. So it's something from something. The seed is producing that something. Nevertheless, says the Alter Rebbe, no, even this is like yesh ma'ayin, because the seed that we plant in the ground, it has nothing to do. There's no estimation. There's no comparison to the fruit that results from it, or to the tree that results from it. Like, again, like I said, like an apple tree, you put an apple seed in the ground. Like, does that look anything like an apple? Does that look anything like an apple tree at all? Does it look anything like the branches of the tree or like the leaves of the tree? Not at all, right? And this is all kinds of different, it's the same thing with many different types of species of seeds and vegetables and all kinds of different grains. It's like we produce something from these grains that is really like a yesh mi'ayin. It's really like an ex nihilo type of thing. And not only is it like, let's say if you put like a corn kernel in the ground and then it produces corn. So you can say like, oh, it's sort of this corn kind of looks like a seed a little bit, maybe not really, but a little bit. But then you look at the stalk, you look at the leaves coming out of it, and it has nothing to do. Like, how did this come about from that little seed? And so we can see that really, even though there may be a human effort in terms of us planting things in the ground, even in those cases where it's not just like this spontaneous generation, it's still it still has a semblance of this yesh me'ayin, this ex nihilo type of thing. Now the Alter Rebbe concludes this section with an interesting point where he says that actually these fruits that come about through the mein nukvin, through the arousal from below, meaning through us actually planting and sowing these seeds, they are actually greater and they're more praiseworthy than those types of vegetation that come about spontaneous from the ground. And from this, we can understand the concept of drawing down the superior lights in the world of Atzilus, Bria, and Yetzirah, and Asiya, which is the whole point of the creation of man, as will be explained elsewhere. So meaning to say, so that last little point there is basically telling us that, like, at first a person might think that, like, okay, yes, when we plant seeds in the ground, that's also kind of like yesh me'ayin, but a true yesh me'ayin type of thing, a more clearer representation of yesh me'ayin is when we have these plants that spontaneously come about, that are spontaneously generated from the ground. And the Alter Rebbe says, no, in fact, there's something superior to us planting things in the ground. Why? Because really, ultimately, this is the whole purpose of man, is we're supposed to put in the work. We're supposed to do something. God wants us to do something, to be like co-creators, to have a participatory part in creation and not to just kind of like sit back passively. So that's the end of the section. And so just like as a concluding note, this reminds me actually of something that I remember learning in Shar Bitachon, which is a section of a wider work called Chovas HaLevavos by Rabbeinu Bechai, which I've recommended on the podcast before. It's all about how to practice and develop your trust in God. And there's a whole section in there actually about the gardening and about this idea that when you plant a seed in the ground, it produces this illusion. It's like sort of like we see this like causality there, that I planted an apple seed in the ground. Like, when I had that fire escape garden briefly, what did I do? I bought specific seeds for jalapeno peppers, for basil, for tomatoes, whatever it is. And I put them in the ground with the expectation that the seed was going to produce these different types of vegetables. But the truth is, that's not actually what happens. What happens there is that the seed is there to stimulate the growth within the ground, and the seed actually disintegrates within the ground, and then the actual vegetable, the actual plant, comes about from nothingness in the ground itself. So it's not the seed that produces the fruit or the plant. It's actually the power of the vegetative force, the power of growth that's found within the ground itself. This is a similar kind of thing, what's brought up in Shar B'Tachon, to a thing of like when we go to work and we think that we're getting money from our boss or from our clients or things like that. But that's actually not the case at all. Money comes from God. And sure, our boss, our clients, those kind of things, they can be conduits through which we receive the money. And it's like when we do our work, it's sort of like we're putting in effort, just like you're sowing the ground, you're planting seeds in the ground, but it's not proportional. It's not like if you put in X amount of work, you're going to get X amount of money. If you're nice enough to this particular boss, he will give you this amount of money. It's the money itself, the produce, the fruits, the tree actually comes from God. Our job is to put in the work for sure, but then to acknowledge that that's just because God wants us to put in the work. God appreciates, he asks of us to do that toil, to do the sowing, to do the planting, but then to let it go and to make space for that plant, for those fruits to come about from the ground itself in a something from nothing manner. So that's it for today, and we will conclude this Iggeres tomorrow, and I will speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.